Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to Group Week. This is part 2 of our series called Youth, and I'm really excited about opening the Word together today. I just want to encourage you and keep encouraging you around this idea of how important it is to do life with a group of people. The one thing I wish that I would have had when I was in your seat as a teenager is I wish I would have been part of a group like one of our family groups, a group of guys or a group of girls who could just challenge me, hold me accountable, and really push me towards God's best for my life. So shout out to all of you who have made it to group. If you're watching this video and you're like, I'm not sure if I'm gonna go or not, I just want to encourage you to get there because God designed us to do life in community. So this series called Youth, we're talking about this one verse found in the book of 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12, where it says this: don't let anyone look down on you because you are young. And everybody said, amen. But set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. And so in the first part, we talked about what it looked like to set an example for the believers in speech. And now we're going to tackle this word in conduct. And really, you just need to read the verse and you already feel kind of convicted like I do when I read it. It doesn't have to be a long, unpacked idea to go, man, I want to set an example for the believers in my conduct, in the way that I act, in the way that I behave. But it's a lot bigger of an idea than that, because here's the reality. We are God's representatives on planet Earth. I remember when I was playing tennis at a really small school and our tennis team was terrible. We went 0-19 one year, by the way. That's not what you want to do if you're in sports. That means we played an entire year's worth of matches and we didn't win one match. So maybe that'll just encourage somebody out there. But I was playing tennis in college for this small school up in the North Georgia mountains. And we were on a road trip and we were playing away at a different school in South Carolina. And some of my friends on the team, we were at a hotel and we decided that it would be fun to just knock on doors and run down the hallway. And so we did that all like for several hours, and we would tell when the security guard was coming to a certain floor and we would go to another floor. We would just outsmart them. We'd be on the other elevator, you know? And then finally we got busted and it wasn't great. We had to go outside in the parking lot at like 3 o'clock in the morning and run sprints for a very long time. I tell coach all the time that's why we didn't win the match the next day, but we had to run for a long time. Coach's speech to us was this. He said, you need to understand that you don't just represent yourselves. You represent our entire university when you act like this. And it was kind of like, for me, I was like, okay, this is a coach speech, but then it made me think, nobody at that hotel knows my name. Nobody knows anything about me or the other clowns that were running around the hallways. All they know is this is the tennis team from this university. And so their entire opinion of our university is these guys are clowns. These guys are immature. These guys, they're never coming back to this hotel before. And everybody's opinion became negative because of us. And I think that's a similar idea. If we're going to set an example for the believers in the way that we act, we have to understand that we're representing more than ourselves. We are, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians, it says this: we are therefore Christ's ambassadors. And then he says even this stronger. It's as though God is making his appeal through us. I can remember when I was trying to figure out Christianity, and I had a lot of questions. One of my biggest questions was this: I knew a lot of Christians, and I knew the way that they acted on Sunday, but I also would see them at a party on Friday. And I would be like, this isn't adding up. Like, if that's what it is, if it's just this like fake thing that people go to on Sunday to make them feel better about themselves, then I don't want any part of that. And it wasn't until later when I met some people, 2 guys specifically, a guy named Adam and a guy named Brandon, and I watched the way that they lived their lives. And by the way that they lived their life, I knew they believed something different than what I believe. And I think the challenge that Paul is giving to Timothy in this text is this. Hey, he's saying, hey, people might not hear you out because you're young. But here's one thing you can do. If that's the case and they're not listening to you because you're young and they just discredit you because you're young, you can just set an example for all the believers in the way that you talk, but also in the way that you act. Isn't that an amazing thought? Like, people's opinions of God are being formed by watching us as the people who claim to be following him. And I have to ask myself that question all the time. Like, when people watch my life, are they getting an accurate view of who God is? Or is somehow like my actions and the way that I act, am I leading them astray? Am I painting a false picture for them of who this God really is? Now, obviously there's grace and none of us are perfect, and God's not demanding that we be perfect. Obviously there's grace. But in a life that's surrendered to Jesus and following him, I think it should be evident in the way that we act. We believe something different than everybody else believes. One famous preacher, old preacher, said it this way. He said, preach the gospel at all times. And then he says, and use words if necessary. It's this idea that it's easy to talk, but it's hard to live it out. And so he's saying, preach the gospel, but you don't have to have a microphone. You don't have to be standing on a stage to preach the gospel. You just have to live according to the way that God's calling us to live. So he says, preach the gospel at all times. And if necessary, then use your words. What a challenging and convicting thought for all of us. Later on in this chapter, Paul ends chapter 4 by saying this. He says to Timothy, watch your life and doctrine closely. See, we're good at watching our doctrine, meaning like the things that we think and the things that we say, all our Christian box. Like we get our Christian box in order. We can do Sundays well. But Paul's saying, don't just do that. Don't just put your Christian box in order. Put your whole life in order, because people aren't just listening to what you say. They're watching how you live and forming their opinions based upon that. It's kind of like the great theologian from Atlanta says, Quavo. You heard of him? He says this, you got to walk it like I talk it. And that's what I think the challenge in this text is today. It's easy to talk about following Jesus. It's easy to put yourself in that camp. It's easy to do that. But it's difficult to walk it out. And I think that's what Paul is challenging Timothy to do. He's going, hey, I want you to remember that you're representing way more than yourself here. You're representing the kingdom of heaven. And so live wisely. Be a person of noble character, because people are watching you more closely than you can imagine. I want to be that kind of guy. I know you want to be those kind of men and women, and that's difficult to do. So I just want to challenge you in groups this week to talk about that. Where are some areas in your life, maybe, man, if people are watching that area of my life, I might be leading them astray. And how can we make changes in those areas to make sure that as people follow our steps, they're going to eventually arrive at an accurate picture of who Jesus is. I love you. Hope you have an amazing time in group week. See you soon.